What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Welcome to yet another XJ Build Series video. In this video, we're going to be tackling something that's been on my list for quite some time now, which is I need more visibility while I'm out on the trails rock crawling. So we're going to be increasing the overall visibility on the Jeep. We're going to be simplifying the wiring a little bit and also making just the overall appearance look so much better. So let's not waste any time. Let's get right into it. So I'm going to show you real quick what I'm talking about as far as visibility while I'm out on the trail. When I'm out on the trails, there are some scenarios when I need to get out the window and see what that front tire is doing. So if you drive a 96 and older Jeep XJ like I do, you know that you have to deal with this little tiny corner window as well as the overall window being very small. And I'm not a very big guy, but it is challenging to really get out here and see what that tire is doing sometimes, especially if you're off camber. So we are going to be fixing that today. The way I'm going to address this issue is I'm going to convert my 1996 and older windows and trim to the 97 and newer windows and trim. On top of gaining all of this extra visibility when doing this window conversion, I'm also going to be simplifying the wiring in the doors. And by simplifying, I mean straight up deleting the wiring in the doors. So no more electric door locks, no more electric windows. We're going to be going back to good old-fashioned manual windows and manual door locks. And the reason for this is because I've had a ton of wiring issues. I'm tired of chasing down broken wires and trying to figure out why my windows aren't working. So this just simplifies everything and makes it more user-friendly, especially when I have passengers so they can now roll down their individual windows. On top of that, doing this conversion, you get to use the 97 and newer trim and window seals. Those window seals are so much better. They encompass the whole perimeter of the window and prevent water leaks. So I know this conversion isn't for everybody, but for a trail rig and for me, this just makes sense. So what I went ahead and did was I performed the conversion from start to finish on the passenger side. I wanted to work out any kinks and make sure I had all of the parts, and I couldn't be happier with how it turned out. So you can see no corner window, everything went together exactly how I wanted it to. I also took some parts off of my parts Comanche, this door panel with this cool pocket, as well as a block off plate where the buttons were. But everything works really well. It goes up and down, no binding. So let's go over what parts I needed to perform this conversion. All right, so real quick, before we go over the parts for this window conversion, I really want to thank you guys for coming by and checking out what I have going on. I put a ton of time and energy into these videos, and it really makes me feel good that you guys enjoy them. If you are new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. The new goal on the channel is 1,000 subscribers, so please help me get to that goal. Also, don't forget to like and comment on the video. Is this a conversion that you would be willing to perform on your Jeep XJ or Comanche? Anyways, let's get into what parts you exactly need in order to perform this conversion. Okay, so let's go over what we need in order to perform this conversion. So for the front, what you need is a 97 and newer window regulator. Whether that's a manual or electric window, whatever your preference is, you need the regulator. Then you need to find these guides that are inside the front doors of the 97 and newer. There's one on both sides, so you need both of those for this conversion. Then I have some washers here. You will need some washers in order to do some shimming just to get everything to line up and operate how it should. And then since my window regulator is a manual regulator, I have the hand crank, and then I also collected all of the hardware for the regulator from that donor vehicle. I also have the window, the trim, and everything else that came off those doors. That way everything flows seamlessly once we get it installed. Then for the rear, since I am converting the rear from electric to manual too, I have manual regulators from a 96 and older Jeep XJ, and I have a parts Jeep outside that has all of the trim for a 97 and newer. So we're going to take that off that Jeep and put them on my 96. Anyway, so this is everything that you need. I recommend collecting all of these parts ahead of time. You don't want to run into a situation where there's bad weather and you don't have windows and you're halfway through needing more parts. So collect everything ahead of time and you'll be good to go. Anyways, let's get the time lapse set up and we'll remove all of the old parts that we don't need and start this process. Okay, so I got the driver's door completely stripped down for the most part. Everything turned out pretty good. No weird issues. I got the window regulator removed. I removed all of the wiring except for the speaker wiring. And I got this little bracket removed. So this was here. This bracket helped hold the door panel. But with the 97 and newer, the seal that goes through here holds the door panel and this would interfere. So up next, I need to remove this little bracket because the window won't be able to go in with this here. 97 and newer doesn't have this, as well as this little bracket in here. This bracket is what held that corner window in place. So I just need to drill out the spot welds and remove that. Now that the door is 100% ready to go, it's time to get the new guide installed. So as you can see on this side, there is a window guide, but on this side, there is not. So what we're gonna do is we're going to use that window guide that I said that was important here. So we're gonna modify this. This one is actually the original passenger side one from the 97 and newer. So what you do is when you get these off of your donor vehicle, you're gonna swap them left to right. Driver's side goes to passenger side goes to driver's side during this conversion. So this was a passenger side one, now it's gonna be a driver's side one. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut this bracket off here and then we'll get things mocked up and I'll show you what you have to do next. So when you're modifying this guide, you're going to want to follow exactly what I do. Start by drilling out those spot welds and removing the bracket. Then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take a hammer and straighten out the bracket to where it's a perfect 90 degrees. Once that's done, take a Sharpie marker and mark out like I did here. You only need one bolt in order to bolt the guide into the door. So doing it in this way was the way that I found worked the best. After doing a little bit of cleanup work on the freshly cut bracket, the next thing you need to do is shorten the bracket. So the bracket is actually too wide to fit into the door. So what I did is I cut 1/4 of an inch off of the bracket and test fit it. And I did find that I needed to trim a little bit more off, but I would start with that. Okay, so now that I got that new front guide prepped for the driver's door, let me show you what needs to happen next. This is where things start to become a little more complicated, but I'll walk you through it and I'll show you exactly how to do it. So the bracket that you cut off the guide needs to be oriented a different way. So this is how the new modified version is going to be. So originally this guide was something like this right down here at the bottom. But when you modify it and to prep it to get it to install in the door, you're going to have it in this orientation. All right, so now that we're back over here at the door, um, let's talk about how we install the new guide. So I already went ahead and took some measurements. I'll put a picture up on the screen with some lines drawn on it so you can kind of understand a little bit better. So the whole idea is we need to get our new guide parallel with the one that is in the door already. So the new guide will go up here in the front. So we need to make sure that is parallel all the way down. So when the window goes up and down, it doesn't bind. So the way that we figure that out is I took some measurements. I measured from the outside here, from the outside of this all the way to here. And I got 27 and 5/8. And then I also measured from the inside surface on both sides, and I got 28 and 3/8. So we just need to make sure that these measurements match up down at the bottom here when we get the guide in. So this square area I have here is where I want the bolt for my new guide to fall. So somewhere in that area is where the new bolt is going to go. Yours will most likely be in a little bit different location than mine. So that is the general area where you want it to be. Okay, so now that we know the measurement from left to right, so to make sure the guides are parallel, we need to make sure they're positioned in the door correctly with each other. So as you can see, this one that's fixed inside the door, you can see that there's a little gap between this support here and the guide, and I measured that at a 1/4 inch. So when we go to install the one on this side, we also need to make sure that it is 1/4 inch away from this support. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to install both of the pieces that we just modified into the door. And then once that is done, you're going to carefully hold them together and position them to where they are exactly a 1/4 inch away from this support. It's pretty tricky. Take your time. And then once you have that measurement or the positioning, you're going to mark the plate that bolts to the door with a Sharpie marker so you know at what angle and at what location on the guide that bracket needs to go. Now that you've determined where the bracket needs to go on the guide, it's time to make them one piece again. So I decided to weld mine together, but if you have left enough material here, you could definitely drill some holes and bolt it. If you are bolting yours together, make sure the hardware that you are using is very low profile, especially on the inside of the guide. All right, so I'm almost done with the hardest part, which is getting this guide installed and making sure it's parallel with the one that's already in there. So this is the modified guide. I threw some paint on it just so I don't have any rust problems down the road. So I'm gonna get this fully installed. I just need to verify where this is gonna bolt. I threw an X on there, kind of where I think it needs to go, but I'm not sure yet. I need to double check all the measurements. So we'll get this installed and then we can move on to the window regulator. So after double checking the measurements, the best way that I found in order to locate where this bolt hole needs to go is I used my middle finger and my thumb as a gauge, and it seemed to be pretty accurate for me in finding where this hole needs to go. The hardest part of this window conversion is now complete. So I got that new front guide fully installed. I also went ahead and installed the window sill and the glass. That way I could verify that when the glass moves to the full up position and the full down position, that everything follows the guides correctly. And I'm really glad that I did, because I found out that when the glass is in the full bottom position, there is some front to back movement. So what I did is, where I had mounted that front guide, I just moved the bolt back about a 1/2 inch, and that tightened up the window when it's in the full down position. So now that the guides are complete, the next step is to get that window regulator installed. Thanks to the internet, I was able to find some measurements for performing this window conversion on 96 and older Cherokees. So what I found is that if you measure off of this hole down 2 3/8 of an inch, and then towards the back of the door 3/4 of an inch, that will give you your upper mount location for the regulator. Now, if we move down to the bottom of the door here, if you measure off of this hole up 5/8 of an inch, that'll give you one of your lower mount holes. And then if you measure towards the back of the door 2 1/16 of an inch, that will give you your second lower mount hole. So these spots for these holes are just a guide. You might need to oval out the hole or reposition just a little bit, but this is a good starting point. All right, so I got the window regulator fully installed. Everything turned out great. No issues there. This side actually went together way better than the passenger side, mainly because of these 2 bolts here. So on the passenger side, I did 2 inches between the bolts, and I ended up needing to oblong the holes to get the bolts to line up with the regulator. So on this side, I added a 1/16 of an inch, so 2 1/16 of an inch between the bolts, and that was the perfect amount of spacing, and the bolts went in without any issues or further modifications. So I can confirm that these measurements are good, and they'll get your regulator installed in your door without any issues. So up next now is to locate where the bolts are going to go for the manual crank. Okay, so moving on to mounting the manual crank on this regulator. If you're working with an electric regulator, you don't have to worry about this step. You could just move on to wiring. But for this regulator, I need to figure out how to mount this crank. And the cool thing about this is that all of these doors are pre-cut for a manual window, so we don't have to figure out that hole. The only holes that we need to worry about are the ones that mount the crank to the door. So the 2 holes that are here from factory, those don't line up with anything, so those can be ignored. I'll put a picture up on the screen of the regulator, but on these regulators, there's a metal plate, and that metal plate actually sits flush with this area here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna drill some holes in the door that line up with that metal plate, the flat parts on that metal plate, and then we'll transfer the holes to that metal plate, and then we'll remove it and drill those holes. I'm sure there's other ways you can mount this. This is the way that I did it, and it seems to work pretty well. Some people bend the tabs, try and mount bolts at an angle. There's that option as well, but this seems to work the best for me. So I'll get the holes drilled and marked, and then we'll come back through and we'll measure all of this so you can kind of have an idea where you need to drill your holes. Okay, so I got the window regulator all reinstalled with the new modified piece for this crank area, and I got it all bolted up. So I took some measurements. So for the bottom bolt, if you measure 3/4 of an inch down from the big center hole, and then 3/4 of an inch to the right, you'll get that bottom hole there. And then for the top, if you measure up from the big hole 5/8 of an inch and then to the left 3/4 of an inch, that'll get you that top hole. So if you use these measurements, it'll get you really close to where you need to be, as well as it'll have everything nice and centered, as you can see here. So just take your time during this part and it'll all come together. All right, so now that the regulator is all installed and everything is operating how it should, I want to go over where I used the washers as shims. So if you remember at the beginning of the video, I talked about you needing some washers. So first up, I'll put a picture up on the screen. So this mount on the regulator, it needs to be bent a little bit, just a hair, and then there needs to be 2 washers installed here. That gives the regulator enough clearance to not interfere too much with the crash support that's up here at the top of the door. Next up, you need 2 washers on this bolt. This is the bolt towards the rear of the door. So the 2 washers on this bolt, what they do is they twist the regulator a little bit to make it parallel inside the door. Without those, it's kind of tweaked and the window doesn't line up right. Next up, you need 2 washers on each of these bolts for holding the glass to the regulator. What that's going to do is going to push the bottom of the glass towards the outside of the door, and it will pull in this side of the glass towards the inside. And what that does is it prevents the glass from catching the seal as it goes up. Otherwise, it'll grab it and kind of fold this in. So it's really important that you shim the glass so that doesn't happen. Anyways, so now that this is all installed and ready to go, it's time to reassemble everything and then move on to the rear. And just like that, everything is fully assembled and looking good. I couldn't be happier with how these windows turned out. I'm super excited to get the Jeep back out on the trail and see how much better the visibility is. So I also got the rear fully done. This window regulator install on the back was way easier. It is a 97 and older window regulator, so there was no modifications there. I did have to modify the door panel, but that's super straightforward. I'll put a picture up on the screen. All of these door panels have a predetermined location for this, and it's like perforated, so you can cut it out really easily and put it right back on, and it lines up perfectly. So pretty cool that Jeep did that, kind of streamlined their production. And I did get the 97 and later trim on this. You can see got that nice rubber seal on the bottom, as well as this rubber seal. So on the later models, this is like painted metal and it gets super rusty, as you saw. So this just cleans it up and makes it look better. There is one modification that you need to do to get this window to work, which is move the bolt over, and that's it. So smooth the bolt over 13/16, drill that hole, and you're good to go. And I use little rubber grommets to cover up all these old holes just so there isn't water getting in there. All right, so that's gonna wrap it up for this one. I think this has definitely been my favorite conversion that I've done on my XJ so far. Definitely one that you should consider if you are frequently out on the trail and you need some more visibility. So in the next video, we're actually gonna continue working on the windows just a little bit. If your window trim looks as clapped out as mine does, you're not going to want to miss that one. I'm going to be restoring that window trim that pretty much every XJ on the planet has that paint peeling off. So we're going to address that. Anyways, thank you for coming by and checking out this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and get out there in your garages, get out there on the trails, and don't forget to be safe out there. We'll catch you next time.